Ribbick, I keep thinking, instead of your last name, I keep thinking of Abraham Lincoln's line to Congress, that famous line to Congress in 1862, we cannot escape history. Every time I see more bombs falling in Lebanon, every time I see more incursions by Netanyahu to continue his forever war, every time I see an American leader arrogantly proclaiming victory, they don't need to go back 1,000 years. There's always blowback in the Middle East, and I'm just shocked that we're not hearing more of that out of Israel or the United States. Give us your thoughts on that and what that blowback may look like.
Well, I think you're right to bring up a historical view about this, because what we do on the news, quite understandably, is we focus on the comments of the president, which after a while accumulate into a nonsensical blather, because he'll say one thing at 9 a.m. and another thing at 2 a.m. as he's on social media. He'll just kind of say anything. But from a historical point of view, what has this added up to? We had a nuclear deal with Iran. We have no illusions about Iran and its dangers it presents to the region, but we had a nuclear deal, however imperfect, that Donald Trump walked away from. He walked away from it, and it had been holding. In 2018, he walked away from it. And now we, in the sixth year of a presidency that's increasingly erratic, malevolent, corrupt, incompetent, we have a president that's now intoxicated with the use of American military force. It's not the first president to be so. And whatever negotiations he has are being conducted by Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, two people who are deeply involved in enriching themselves in the region, which is unprecedented. And so an American is left with witnessing this and paying for it, both financially and in the danger that it presents to our people in uniform, and has to wonder what the hell we are doing and toward what end. What is this presidency presenting for us? And I think it's just a deeply dangerous time in American history. And I think that Donald Trump has presented an emergency for this country for a very long time, but it's gotten deeper and deeper.
David, I want to read a little of your recent piece on Iran. You write this, quote, "The cruelest irony is that the president who addresses the Iranian people in the language of liberation, urging them to throw off the yoke of a regime that has brutalized them for decades, is the same man who threatens American journalists with treason charges and tries to strong-arm broadcasters into subservience. Having torn up a nuclear agreement in his first term and gone to war with no coherent goal in his second, Trump now directs his fire at the one thing he cannot afford to leave standing, the truth. What's at stake is democracy's oldest promise, that the people may call on their government to answer for what it does in their name." And if you just look at public polling, David, they're not quite sure, the American people, that you write about what this war is all about. They're told on the one hand it's about regime change, on the other hand it's about crippling the nuclear capability of Iran, and then on the other hand it's degrading the military capability of Iran to strike and hurt our neighbors in the Gulf and also in our allies in Europe as well. So the lack of a coherent strategy amounts to the American public going, largely, what are we doing in Iran?
Well, they were never consulted. Congress was never consulted. The day before President Trump announced that he had gone into Iran with Israeli forces, he was in negotiations, and the foreign minister of Oman had said that there was real promise there. Again, I have no illusions. No one has any illusions, I hope, about the nature of Iran's regime and its capacity to lie and to be extremely difficult to deal with. The fact is, we have dealt with that same regime, and we did come to a nuclear deal. And you don't make treaties with your friends; you make them with your enemies through long, tough, complicated negotiations. We seemed not to have the stomach for that, or the skill or the will for that. And we did what was close at hand. We sent in the bombers. And I have no doubt about the skill of the purely military aspect of this. There was an opportunity. Iran was extremely weak after the 12-day war last June. And with free skies, we've been able to, quote unquote, take out one installation after another, all the while forgetting that human beings are being killed. And toward what end? Was there really the illusion that this regime was just going to be toppled by an opposition that unfortunately is not organized and would have faced, being mowed down in the streets? These are illusions conceived by people that just are not realistic about what's present in Iran and what was possible. And at the same time, our leader, the President of the United States, is perfectly willing to BS his way through every press conference and change the subject and start talking about his magnificent new ballroom. It beggars the imagination after a while. Historians will not be kind to him or this. And I think the American people, in greater and greater numbers, are seeing the light, to be perfectly honest.
So as David said, President Trump never really made the case for this war. But Mike Barnicle, tonight, he addresses the nation. A 9 o'clock primetime address, we assume from the Oval Office, in which he would have the opportunity to explain why we've done this. But he will make this speech at a moment where he finds himself really boxed in with two choices. One would be to escalate the conflict, including perhaps with ground troops who are now in the region ready to go if he gives the green light. That would be a risky operation. American lives would be lost. It also likely would be politically unpopular. Or he walks away, whether that's in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it might be, perhaps with not actual regime change, but the Strait of Hormuz is still in Iranian control, which would be an economic blow, not just to the U.S., but to the globe. So the president tonight, it is a war of choice, and these are problems of his own making.
Yeah, but Jonathan, you're describing someone who has a theme to what he's doing, who has some sense to what he's doing. What we have is a man who is so erratic and has been so erratic, and his inability to stop talking 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day with different positions on the fact that he's talking about war is unnerving. To David Remnick's point, I was speaking with someone yesterday who is well-versed, has been well-versed in both diplomacy and the politics of all things like this for over 20 years. And this person was telling me that, in his estimation, the credibility of the United States has been so far diminished over the last 18 months that it's unnerving, that the Arab states now feel as if they're on their own, given Trump's behavior, in his erratic behavior over the last 18 months, that what's going on in the Mideast has ironically made Iran stronger in the view of this person who I was speaking to, that the theocracy is not going to go away, that the country is not going to change, that the leadership of Iran, no matter who's gone or who is still there, they still have the capacity and the will and the determination. They just killed 30,000 of their own people 2 weeks ago. That's what they're going to do if push comes to shove. And Joe, he ended up by telling me that the idea that we would walk away from the Straits of Hormuz is the most irresponsible thing and the most dangerous thing that he's heard from an American leader in decades.
I find it hard to believe that we will actually do that. The possible cascading effects, geopolitically, economically, are unfathomable. David Remnick, we've talked about the United States and President Trump. You've written about Benjamin Netanyahu as well. I think many have been deeply concerned. I certainly have expressed my concerns about, as a longtime supporter of Israel, as what Benjamin Netanyahu's policies, what his forever war, what his a leveling of half of Lebanon after declaring Hezbollah defeated in 2024, what happened in Gaza and what continues to happen. Marco Rubio saying that Netanyahu dragged America into this war. For supporters of Israel, let me guide it this way. For supporters of Israel that are listening, like myself, what are the long-term negative impacts on Israel as a nation, specifically, and the neighborhood it lives in generally over the next decade?
Well, the moral damage done to itself, to Israel. It begins with the damage done to other human beings. What was done in Gaza was so beyond excessive, so horrific that I just don't think we have taken in how damaging that will be. Forget obviously first and foremost the Palestinian people, but also to Israel itself. And now a lot of political forces in Israel are talking about, quote, doing Gaza in the south of Lebanon. And I just don't know where it ends. And at the same time, you have elections coming up in Israel. And I don't see any prospect for dramatic change, because either Netanyahu will find a way to win, and he's extremely skilled as a politician and as a campaigner, and support for this war in Israel runs very high. Or somebody like Naftali Bennett will come to power, quite conceivably, who is no less right-wing on these issues. And the only thing he doesn't have hanging around his neck in quite the same way is the security failure of October 7th, 2023. So Americans should not expect dramatic change in the leadership of Israel. I mean, I don't see that happening. Are there security concerns for Israel? And have there always been for the length of its existence? Of course. But was this wise? Is there a morality to the degree of this this action in Lebanon? I can't see it, and I think that will be, in the end of ends, extremely damaging.
It's hard to tell at the moment, Joe and Mika, exactly what the fallout will be from this Iran operation, but the degrading of the relationship going forward between Israel and the United States looks like it's going to be one of them. The problems in the relationship between the Gulf states and America that this has caused could be another. And then you look more globally, and the winners from the conflict so far, China and Russia, the two countries that actually pose the greatest threat to the United States going forward. So however this ends, there has certainly been a shakeup, not just in the region, but potentially even in the global balance of power as well.
All right, editor of The New Yorker, David Remnick, thank you very much for coming on this morning. We'll see you soon.